For all our participants who are blind or have visual impairments, all speakers will begin with a short descriptions of themselves before they speak, before they share their inputs. I am Zuki. I am a late 30s African brown woman with messy dreadlocks. And I'm sitting at my laptop with my office behind me and a flower pot. So in our final digital dialogues, we're putting really the spotlight on the effects of digital accessibility on urban and rural livelihoods. And in particular, we're asking the question, how does urban bias deepen contextual disparities? We know that the effects of digital accessibility on urban and rural livelihoods unfolds against a backdrop of evolving technological landscapes. So things are changing and dynamic all the time. And this introduces both opportunities and challenges. And this is what makes our discussion today particularly interesting. Questions of digital accessibility are critical in the context of urban and rural livelihoods. So it's important to consider these and how they play out. So in part, we feel that this is an important discussion because digital accessibility shapes dynamics of urban and rural livelihoods in different ways. And so today's discussion is especially interesting as we'll be interrogating the ways in which digital access affects livelihoods. But on the other hand, we're going to also explore questions of urban bias. So our speakers are very well placed to do that. So without any further ado, I'd really like to again thank you for connecting today, and I'm going to welcome our speakers for today. We have a great panel of speakers to assist us with this discussion. Ryan will share more of each speaker's detailed bios in the chat. I'll share just a little bit. Our first speaker is Trisha Gloria Nabaye, who serves as the engagement and advocacy lead at Policy, which is a feminist civic tech organization working on the intersection of data, design, and technology. After Trisha, we're going to hear from Mike, who is currently the senior program coordinator at PlanAct, a non-profit organization based here in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Mike has been working for 25 years, conducting several trainings across a range of areas, including integrated development planning and municipal budgets. Then we'll hear from Hans Wieler, who is a board member of the cooperative Co-work Lab, which is a German network and agency for rural co-working. He runs a rural co-working space himself and is also a community-supported farm, which sounds quite interesting. So looking to hearing from all our speakers. So in this next bit, each of our panelists will share their inputs for 5 minutes after they introduce themselves, and then we'll have some more discussion and questions. Again, to remind you to please feel free at any point you feel the need to put some chats, comments, questions, anything as we go along. Right, over to you, Trisha. Please put your camera on. Trisha joins us from Kampala in Uganda. The floor is yours, Trisha.
Thank you very much, Zuki, for that introduction. Welcome, good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to discuss, a topic at the intersections of technology, society development, and inclusivity. And so as we delve into the profound impact of digital accessibility on urban and rural lives, specifically examining how urban biases further different, contextual disparities. For me, the critical entry point would be in really highlighting the rural realities and how the conversation continues to change as we dive into rural settings, particularly conversations of internet connectivity then become conversations of access. They become conversations around just mobile device connectivity. And so for me, to have such a more inclusive and equitable digital landscape is critical in thinking about how specific realities play in addressing digital connectivity issues. I forgot to introduce myself, my description. I'm a Black African woman and I'm wearing black, sorry for that. I'm wearing black and I wear glasses. My dreads are held back. Yeah, that is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trisha. You went well below your allotted 5 minutes. So we're going to hand over now to Mike, who joins us from Johannesburg. Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zuki, and good afternoon. It's 5:15 in South Africa, and thank you for the invitation. As Mike Makwela, Makwela, from South Africa, introduced, I work for a non-profit organization called Planet as a senior program coordinator. The late 50s, lighter in skin, I have my glasses. I am at home now in my sitting room. So that's who I am. The topic comes at the right time when of the digital accessibility is becoming a reality. And I am going to share with the audience the pilot project that we have just completed on digital addressing. The digital address project is a first of its kind in South Africa. Planet has partnered with Google to use their technology called the plus code. A plus code address uses GIS system. In other words, it captures the latitude, the latitudinal and the longitudinal coordination. So there's that coordination. It displays the numbers and the widths. For example, an address would be like MV 58 plus UGM. So that would be the address of your property. So it's a plus code system. We piloted this project in an informal settlement, or what is popularly known as slums. Informal settlements, it's a name in South Africa for settlements that are unproclaimed. They are considered to be illegal. They don't appear on the cadastre of the municipality. And so they are in the margins of society. But they are mainly found on the periphery of the cities. As a result of them not being proclaimed, they don't have an address. The first point that I want to make is that a lack of a digital address can be a matter of life and death. Imagine in the evening, you call an ambulance or the police, and they can't locate where you'll stay as a result of the fact that you don't have an address. So indeed, it's a life and death issue. So we use the digital intervention to deal with those challenges. So a household will have a plus code address, which will help the police, the ambulances, and other services for you to be located. And that's the impact of not having an address. Things that we take for granted. If you have an address, you can easily call an Uber, or you feel like having a pizza tonight, you can do so. But for people who live in informal settlements and rural areas where there is no address, their life is complicated. The second issue is that what we observed when we started installing the digital addresses in the informal settlements, the informal traders, informal businesses started thriving one particular young man who runs a business employed 3 more young people to start delivering meat and other services that he's providing. So a digital address is able to trigger businesses, because currently we know that the e-commerce has become a preferred way of doing business, buying or selling. So if you do not have an address, you are then deprived of this opportunity. The third issue that I would like to raise is that when you live in urban areas, whether you live in slums or informal settlements, you are deprived of the benefits of the city life because you don't have an address. So it is much more worse when you live in rural areas, where when you have to give me an address, you say there you will see a big tree next to the road. That's where you will find me. Or I live next to a river. That's where you will deliver my goods and services. And so one can make an interpretation that a lack of a digital address, such as the one that we have piloted, deprives people their dignity, the right to dignity and citizenship. And so this project is intending to deal with those anomalies. I think in closing, the digital address, as I have just explained, provides an opportunity and it closes a gap between those who live in urban areas and rural areas. Thank you so much for listening to me. Much appreciated.
Thanks, but Mike. Yeah, so many questions that come to mind with that. Thank you. We're going to now hand over the floor to Hans, who joins us from Hitsaka. I'm using my own pronunciation there, in northern Germany, a rural town in northern Germany. The floor is yours, Hans.
I will describe myself as white male, 50 years old, and I'm here at my co-working space in Hitsaka. And yeah, I would like to contribute something I hope could be part of a solution to bridge the divide or to level down disparities, because I'd like to talk about rural co-working, which is quite new, but seeing now that the last especially the last 5 years, and COVID was a big accelerator in this springing up all over in the countryside. And I'm from a cooperative that really would like to foster or to support this movement. Our dream is to actually see those co-working spaces every 15 minutes in the countryside in Germany. We're not yet there. We're at the moment 130 co-working spaces in this co-work land network, which is organized as a cooperative. And we are 250. See, we've got problems with the internet still. The moment that they're rolling out broadband in our district, but they haven't yet reached this little town. All right, we started with co-work land 4 or 5 years ago, so we're now slowly maturing out of a startup into establishment. As I said, we are now represented all over Germany and now going into Austria as well. And what we do is we support people who'd like to set up or to found a change between operators and lobbying for favorable policy conditions to so that we even get more of those places. Often municipalities ask us to help them to set up things like that, not for them actually to operate it, but to actually see if it's feasible. So we do a lot of feasibility studies. And there's one thing we often do is we do pop-up co-working. So we install co-working spaces only for like 3 months. Then we invite people to use it. It's quite easy. It's quite put a real co-working space into place. Suki, can you hear me?
Yeah. So
Oh.
Hans, you did cut off there at some point.
Oh my
Perhaps if you could wrap up, and what we can do is if anything was missed, we can put it in the chat and ask questions.
All
I am
right.
not saying that we got cut off.
Maybe I make it really short. I'm just saying rural co-working, we see it as a chance, a strategic chance to react with place-based strategies to develop the countryside, to actually also supply access to internet and so on. And
Okay, I think we lost Hans again there. Perhaps, hopefully it'll improve, but thank you so much, Hans. And the connection was not great, but perhaps some of what was missed we can ask in the chat. I have now learned a new sign for internet break. So thanks for that. We're now going to move into the second part of our discussion. And at this point, I'm going to just throw in a very broad question to our panel, and then allow the panelists to ask each other some questions. Hans, if you can still hear us, perhaps you could also put your question in the chat and your answer, but let's see how that goes. We'll just have to improvise as we go, given your connectivity. But I think we caught the bulk of your input. Hans, thank you so much. So my just sort of break the ice question to everyone, and anyone can, I see there's a question there. Thanks. So we've heard about the disparities and we've heard about the challenges. But what does this tell us about what is required for our journey towards closing the inequality gap? So I'm happy for any panelists to jump in and answer that. Trisha, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So what does it require for our journey? I think beyond prescribing the same solution to, all the contexts that we exist in, my hope is that as we have this conversation in regard to internet connectivity and access, is that we factor in the realities of different contexts when it comes to internet connectivity. Recently, we were working on the future of work with women in media, and while we were having the conversation with urban center women, it was almost the reality of how they spend their time online, the ability to afford internet access. But when we just opposed it and brought rural women into the conversation, women in media, and the conversation then switched to accessibility to just even mobile devices. And so you find disparities as big as there are women who share, like over 4 women sharing one mobile device in a rural setting, and yet they're doing the work as journalists. And so you imagine how that really changes the dynamic of information accessibility and the ability for them to even just be economically available within the context that they exist, but also in how important information then moves from rural settings into their newspapers, into their news outlets. And so in appreciating these different nuances, it helps us, provide contextual support so that we do not blanket deal with the realities of the global south vis-a-vis the global north. Even when we speak within the urban centers and the global north, while we're talking about realities of AI deployment, accessibility, a lot of us are still playing catch up to a lot of the things that are happening within the internet ecosystem and the technological ecosystem. And so for me, what it will take will be that we create solutions that speak to the context, and we appreciate the nuances within the environments where different people live and where different people survive, so that in providing in providing solutions, we look at the disparities in the rural area and then examine them from that point, look at the urban area and examine it from that point, so that we do not end up leaving a particular group behind. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. I absolutely appreciate you bringing in particular, the specific example around women in rural areas. I'm really hoping that we can also draw on some of the issues around young people, youth, unemployment, and so on. But I'm not going to put words in the mouths of our panel. What I'd like to do now is to actually invite the panel to make themselves visible. Hans, recognizing that you do have bandwidth problems, I think it's okay. Let's see how it goes for you. We can test you being on video, but it might be wiser to be off video. I'm going to then leave the panel essentially, but I'm keen to hear any questions. I think given that, Tricia, we heard your voice first, I'm curious to know if you have any questions that you'd like to throw at your fellow panelists. And similarly, of course, with our other panelists, if you have questions for one another. I do wish I was a panelist because I've got some burning questions, but let's see how things go.
Yeah, I think for me, mine is to Mike in regard to digital IDs and the reality of data protection and privacy. How do you envision, the critical areas of data protection and data privacy in regard to digital IDs? Because in the realities of the information, communities that we live in, a lot can easily be dragged into surveillance, but also in the realities of insecurities, particularly in, for example, in the global south, where, the context, particularly even for political narratives, can be, digital IDs can be used non-positively. How do we then protect users in rural areas from surveillance, but also protect their data? Yeah.
Tricia, you're correct. Data is very important. It is very sensitive. You need to make sure that it's protected. For now, the focus is on household address, not so much about individuals taking information from individuals, precisely because we want to protect information that we're talking about. So it's an address. So for now, it doesn't say Mike Makwela stays in this address. It just says, here's an address, okay, of that. But secondly, because we are using the technology in partnership with Google, so the issue of protecting data and information is very critical. We have an agreement, we have a signed MOU, an agreement with Google on this project. So we protect each other's image and each other's brand, because that can also be a big problem. So yeah, for now there's a need to do that. But also in our country we have pieces of legislation. I mean, we've got Protection of Personal Information Act, we call it POPIA. So you can't just display information without a consent. So yeah, for now we're quite trying to minimize information to be spread out. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Tricia. I wanted to ask Hans, You spoke about co-working spaces. Would you like to elaborate a bit? What are these co-working spaces? I mean, how have you introduced digital intervention in these co-working spaces? I hope you can hear me, Hans.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Thank you, Mike, for this question. Well, of course, a space is an analog thing. You know, people are real people, real space, real conversations, which is actually the wealth of that concept. But on the other side, it's a digital place, because a lot of things, a lot of learning, a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge, and also a lot of knowledge transfer is taking place in this co-working spaces, because you have a lot of people that are involved in IT, programming, and so on. So it's quite interesting to see. I think even digitality needs analog conversations and places. So it's a bit like an intersection. I mean, as you've seen, well, I just had problems with my internet myself. We still have problems with that in the rural countryside in Germany. But in some areas, co-working spaces are like a little bit even less though, but were in the past, they were like islands, you know, because they had a big connectivity and people actually coming there and having access there, you know. So I really like the idea, if you have like huge stretches of land area districts, and there is a prerequisite for digital infrastructures to really be part of society, be part of job opportunities, then maybe this kind of islands or hubs, you can even say, that are connected, even maybe connected with some places like those co-working space in the city, then you can maybe find access to good services, to digital services in these places. So this could be part of the solution. Yeah, and in turn, of course, it would also be a question. I mean, it's also a place where you have an address. I mean, we have sometimes people that are freelancing, for example, and they say, okay, I actually don't want customers to come to my house. I want a representative place, building, meeting room, lobby, whatever, and an address for my whatever parcels. So I just go to a co-working space, become a member of that, and so I can do things like that. And nowadays we are more and more in the rural, not so much in the urban, but in the rural context, we do understand it more and more as the third place where we do all kinds of things. So we have spaces that are now slowly combined with childcare, with places where you can get your community supported farm grown vegetables, where you can collect parcels, where you even have a mail post office, you know. So it's slowly, there's in the rural countryside, co-working is only part of a bigger issue, of a bigger setting, of a bigger hopefully solution for what we all suffer in the countryside, wherever we are in the world, decline of services maybe, and we hope in a way to get people attracted to the countryside again. And now they can work remote, and when we do have even only on the spot, have a good infrastructure for digital services, then they can even return to the countryside, to the families, to the traditions in a way, or bring something back, you know, because people who have been in the cities have often gained networks, capital, knowledge, and we need these resources back in the countryside. So I see it as one little mosaic solution pebble for rural communities. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to come in there, particularly for Hans, in the reality of the future of work, but also in view of mental health and making sure that remote work doesn't really separate us from people, and also from the ability to to share with knowledge with people within our spaces. How are you imagining these co-working spaces to be able to navigate real life relationships with people, but also so that people constantly connect, not just digitally, but also, physically. So because there is still a lot that we can learn from each other, even in the reality of, the future of work and the digital co-working spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope I can contribute in a way that what I experience also in our co-working space here, that people meet that haven't met before, and that innovation is something, a recombination of knowledge, really. And if you have, for example, a carpenter or a gardener here, and you have an architect or an IT guy, and they have a coffee together, then there might be something new happening. And of course, we can be connected all over the world, and we're doing it today, which I really appreciate. But on the other side, the human touch, I mean, the real creativity, I think, happens when you really realize that you like somebody, and you understand what he's talking about, and when you and that only happens, or really effectively happens, when you see each other and experience each other. I mean, people are actually coming here, for example, they sit here sometimes even for days before they actually talk, but eventually they get used to each other, and then one day it happens, and we see people coming to this rural country town, and from Berlin, for example, now a friend of mine, he's now a friend of mine. He thought he had to move because his wife wanted it to, and he found people here, and he got rooted down and settled and found home. And that's not always works, but that's the potential of these places, and I would love to see them, if they connect to a system, and even then it might be even more interesting, I mean, yeah. My
Thanks, Hans.
question would be, sorry, my question would be very much, how can we, but that is a very broad question. Is that something, I mean, we are now slowly working on that in Germany, but I have a bit of an insight of Kenya, a bit of an insight of South Africa, rural South Africa. And I just ask myself, and China, ask myself, is that a solution how has it, can we do it? How can it be operative in other contexts? And I mean, nobody can give an answer most probably right now, but I really invite you. We would like to talk with people about this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. Thanks for raising that. And I think there's something interesting in the questions that are arising amongst yourselves as panelists, is around connecting, what we're talking about. So the sort of digital access to the humanity of aspects, or the sort of the civic of civic tech. And I think that's sometimes something that we lose in conversations like this. So I don't want to cut short the panelists' questions to each other, but Hans, your question takes us very neatly. And I'd like us to move now to the third part of our dialogue, which is now looking at what questions have been shared either in advance or in the chat by our participants. And there's an interesting question that actually I think will go, given time, with whichever panelists, and I think we can go with raising your hand up physically so we can all get a little bit of exercise. But whichever panelist raises their hand up first, I'll try to keep an eye. And it's a question from Jonathan at Wikimedia Germany, which I think is quite an interesting one. And he asks, or they ask, are there other communities that would define themselves as urban or rural that we are not addressing? So I wonder if that's a question that the panelists, I mean, I see Tricia smiling. I'm not seeing a hand up immediately. Okay, so we'll have Tricia take that question and then we'll move on to the next one. And these are questions that were shared at the point of registration. Tricia, please take this one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Saki. Are there communities that we're not addressing that the prescribers rule, urban, that we're not addressing? And rightly so, they are there. You know, in the recent years, the technological development really was focused on urban areas. And so there were a lot of those areas that were rural, that were left behind. And so that created a gap in access, but also in resources. And it's the imagination that there are contexts that we've claimed to be urban, but also experience low speed rates, experience low connectivity, and low advancement of technology. For example, I sit in Kampala today, and I can't explain how terrible the internet is, but also how expensive and unaffordable it is. And so it is very possible for us to be caught up in the technological development and imagine that everyone is coming along, but the internet disparity and the gaps continue to grow. And so, yes, it is present with us, but what can we do about it beyond, us talking about it? Is that, we continue to acknowledge where we need to do the work and do, research that really, informs the interventions that can come from that. So it is crucial for us to advocate for inclusive technological development that, centers the experiences of women and young girls, but also for youth, because a lot of the people that spend their time online have perpetually been, the young people. And so for me, I think it's very critical for us as we prescribe interventions that we think about, the lives that it will impact, but also their lived realities of how they've experienced the internet, how they've experienced these technologies. And like I said, while we have conversations of internet connectivity, there are communities within our area that are actually just talking about accessibility. And for me, that disparity that, affects not just their everyday livelihood, but also their economic disparity, their ability to get onto opportunities, because we've seen a trajectory where a lot of, opportunities are then now digitally, disposed. So for me, I think it is crucial for us to center our solutions and our interventions in understanding the context, but also in understanding, the definition of what urban and rural is in regards to both the global south and the global north, but also in making sure that these inequalities are seen at a base of, data and research, so that whatever prescriptions we have do not come from, a need basis, but also from critical data that helps us, bridge the internet and the inequality gap in regards to digital connectivity and inequalities. Thank you.
So can I say a word, please?
Sure.
Please. Yeah. So in a small way, the pilot project attempts to address this kind of challenges. One is that you don't even need the data to use the plus code address system, this digital technology. And as a result, what we have seen in one of the pilot sites in Tembelihle is that the gender-based violence office has been able to respond much quicker to respond to the crisis of women and children who are facing this gender-based violence, and the police are able to respond much quicker. So you don't need data. Perhaps it's something that needs to be thought through. How do we make these kind of technology accessible, but also knowing very well that the cost of data is expensive? How do you mitigate that? And this plus code system, in a small way, attempts to do that you can use this technology without data. So there's no excuse for the police or the ambulance or the emergency services or the victim themselves not to report or not to respond to the crisis, because as long as we have this, you're able to go into a Google map, you can be able to access services. I thought I needed to say that.
Yeah, that's quite helpful, and it actually answers another question to some extent that we had, which came from Kenny at African Dream, asking around, you know, reaching sort of deep rural areas. So I think, yeah, Kenny, if you're on the call, I hope that does to some extent answer your question. We also had another question from Madhav from Care Nepal, who is asking around high internet costs. And I think that Trisha did speak to this issue as a kind of a persistent or a recurring challenge as a factor that prevents marginalized rural populations to, you know, as a barrier for digital access. So Madhav, I hope you feel covered. South Africans like to say I'm covered when they mean my question has been addressed. So Madhav, I hope you feel covered in that regard. Perhaps I'm noting our time and really wanting to be sure that we do also get to share kind of some final housekeeping issues or updates. But there is one question, and I wonder if any of our panelists are able to answer this. It's a bit of a tricky one, but it's a question from George, who is at the University of Johannesburg, and George asks, what is the percentage of internet access in rural areas in Africa? I mean, this is probably quite a technical question, but what is the percentage of internet access in rural areas in Africa compared to Europe? And how can we improve the internet infrastructure to reach all corners as it is in China? That's an interesting question. And it seems that I don't know if George is on the call and would be able to kind of elaborate, but I'm assuming that part of it is the comparison between rural areas in Africa and rural areas in Europe, as you know, from where Hans is in rural northern Germany. That comparison, and then improving infrastructure. And I don't know enough to know about the China context, but George refers to infrastructure to reach all corners as it is in China. Is anyone, of our panel? I mean, it's quite a technical question in some respects. Anyone keen for it? Also open for any on the call if they want to answer. There's also the option to call a friend. No, I think I'm also we can open it up to the floor and see if anyone and please feel free if you are someone who kind of has those statistics, because it is quite a technical question. So sorry, that's my dog choking in the background. I'm sorry about that. We now have not much time before we wrap up, but I really wanted also just to say that perhaps some of the questions that haven't been addressed in the call, we'll see if our panelists are able to address them via email, because we will then share follow-ups and updates. So I'm noting some questions from other people who registered for the session in advance that we haven't been able to get to. So just before we do that, is there any other question from the panel? Just a really very, if you have something that's burning.
I'll go. I mean, maybe just to create intersections in the conversation. You know, while we talk rural, while we talk urban, particularly for Mike and Hans, where do we bridge constantly? Because I know opportunities for us, and maybe I'm speaking from a place where I have seen zero to no connectivity in rural areas. So how do we bridge and create linkages for people that live in rural areas in making sure that internet is a social good and not a luxury? So the same way we get water, the same way we get electricity, how do we create that link so that beyond interventions like Hans is creating, beyond the digital IDs, we have, you know, this internet connectivity, but also technological connectivity as a social good, so that people can access internet and be able to, you know, advance their lives, but also create experiences for themselves online that can help them propel them into different opportunities. Yeah.
Well, any country that does not take the reality into context is going to be deprived of opportunities. We are moving quite fast in the fourth industrial revolution, and fifth industrial revolution, sixth industrial revolution, and so on. And I mentioned earlier on that e-commerce is becoming a big issue. If you want to trade, those kind of, buy online, deliver of goods and services. If you want to, gone are the days where we would receive our municipal entities services from our post box. You now can click in and get your statement of water and sanitation or whatever. Gone are the days where you have to drive and go and collect, if you're a student, books, whatever, your learning material. You can easily provide an address and it can be dropped there. Gone are the days where you'll wait for hours and hours for a bus or a taxi to come. Now you can quickly go into the system and Uber and get so. So the life is moving to that direction. So it's important that government and private sector, and I think we've not said anything about private sector and all of us acknowledge that if we don't respond to the reality of the current, we are going to be left behind. There's going to be a slack in economic growth. Your citizens are not going to be technologically advanced, etc. So it's upon us, all of us, NGOs, private sector, government, and all of us to play that role to make sure that everyone left behind and we've got access and to this digital technology. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Hansa, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you
Yes.
have a 30-second input?
Yeah, I can just say, I mean, I see that digital infrastructure is a prerequisite, of course, but I would really like to see it developed in a strategic way. So if you just not cover all the landscape, but really say, okay, where can I actually provide such services and combine it with like, okay, well, it's my topic with co-working, and once we've got it there, then it fosters real relationships, meanwhile being a digital place as well. And there's a lot about digital infrastructure, but if you're not taught and skilled to use it, if you just can watch Netflix with it, for example, I mean, we need education, we need skills, we need knowledge there. So can we develop a place where we can combine it and then connect these places to a network? And along these network infrastructures, we have also a digital infrastructure and cover regions that have not yet access to sufficiently to services. It's more a dream, sorry, but I would be interested to work on something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent, Hans. Thank you. I think this is a panel, there's lots of richness, and certainly I imagine everyone who has joined us today is part of the dreamers. I hear you say it's a dream, but I think that's precisely the kind of dreaming that we need to do, the kind of innovation that we need to be all involved in. And I think that's what brings us together today. With that, I just want to say some few thanks. Firstly, thanks to in the chat, Daniel has shared a resource which might answer a question that George shared. And George, hopefully you'll get your answer in our update. Ryan will be following up soon with some resources from our panel today. But really just to say a big thanks to each of our speakers. Your insights, your energy, and speaking from the heart was really fantastic. I enjoyed it. I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you. And I know that our participants enjoyed that too. Thanks in particular to our international sign language interpreters. Your work was a little challenging today between my connectivity issues and Hans's connectivity issues. So thank you for that, and the captioner as well for your work. We really appreciate it. And certainly not least of which, thank you to the audience today for your participation and engagement and your questions beforehand and joining us in December. So really your commitment and your interest in the subject is very clear. Thank you as well for your great questions.